Hey everyone, this is Professor JacquieBaly, and I wanted to go ahead and, as you're reviewing Chapter 1, go over some key terms that are going to be important. But before I do that, I wanted to make a couple of clarifications versus when we're using Zoom versus YouTube links. The reason why I've decided to give most of your lectures, or some of them at least, via YouTube is because it's much easier for you to study. You can study at your leisure, not necessarily at a fixed time, even though that's the time we have designated as our class. And also, I wanted to incorporate Zoom meetings because as we're progressing in the semester, you will have questions. And so that will be your opportunity to vocalize whatever questions you have on the information or material. But as you can see, we're going to do a lot of our communication through Blackboard. Please be vigilant and look at your Blackboard. I would say close to daily, but definitely at least a minimum of 2 to 3 times per week. Because I will be communicating and through the announcement portion. So we had a hurricane warning last week, and so the school was closed for the latter part, and so we are already a little bit behind, but that's okay. I mean, one of the best things about us doing it via online, and it's sort of new to me because I've always had in-classes or classes in person, is that we can make these adjustments. So another question that you may have is exactly where you should be. You should be reading Chapter 1. Any additional information that I'll be providing, I will provide through Blackboard. You will have additional readings, and I will give you ample warning before any quiz or an exam or papers are due. So we will be communicating openly, even though this is going to be mostly an online class. Okay, so as you are looking through Chapter 1, here's some key things that I have made note that you should make note of because you will see them again, either through a quiz or an exam or something. Our objectives for this first chapter is to analyze the relationships between Texas political culture, our politics, and our policies. And we're going to go into all of those terms as we progress. Differentiate between the attributes to describe our different regions in Texas. Texas is quite large, and there's a reason everybody says everything's better and bigger in Texas. So we're going to go through each region and what the characteristics associated with those regions are. Also, the political struggles throughout the last century, decades, for equal rights and successes that we've had in Texas. And then apply what we learned about our culture and our state and our growing diversity in Latinos, in Blacks, for women, for homosexuals. We're going to analyze all of those in Chapter 1. So, ideology. People often get confused ideology versus party. When we talk about ideology, usually 2 terms come to mind: conservative or liberal. In Texas, close to half of the voters identify as conservative. Now, this is why ideology can be confusing. Sometimes ideology can transfer between Republicans and Democrats. In other words, you can have many people equate or call themselves conservative Democrats. I know lately, especially if you look at the news, when you hear conservative, you only think Republican. But for many, many years, especially in the South, especially in Texas, you had many people who vote Democrat, but would call themselves also conservative. We're going to go through what those ideology terms are. conservative versus liberal. But please keep in mind, you can transpose both of those and transfer both of those versus and attach them to your political or party affiliation. For ideology, in Texas in particular, more men identify as conservative over women, and more white or Anglo identify themselves as conservative over Latinos or African American. Out of the demographic age-wise, you will see the older population, the silent, the baby boomers, identify more conservative versus Gen X and millennials. And you have a graph in your textbook called Texans Ideology. Make sure you're familiar with that because it goes through the percentages versus demographic. Partisanship. Now remember I said your ideology sometimes can transfer with your partisanship, okay? When we talk about partisanship, are you Republican or are you Democrat? Another term that we will use repeatedly are independents. And on the national scale, you saw independents helped our current president become president. Over 200 counties in the country that voted for President Barack Obama in 2012 switched and voted for President Donald Trump in 2016. Many of those people will call themselves independents, which means they don't really strongly identify with either Republican or Democrat parties. They truly will go, as you see in 2012 in the example I just used, and 2016, based on the candidate and the candidate's philosophies and policies. We have seen in our state of Texas a Republican dominance in the last 20 years. In other words, the Republican Party has been the strong party, the party that has controlled both the House and the Senate statewide for over 20 years. In 2018, we saw that shaken for the first time really in a strong statewide race with Beto O'Rourke when he came within 3 points of beating Senator Ted Cruz. And that was the first time you saw a reemergence of the stronghold that the Democrat Party could actually have in our state. If you look at national news, they will often say that Texas is now a swing state. And what they mean by that, or Texas is in play, what they mean by that is we have been dominated by the Republican Party for decades. And with the race that I just mentioned, within 3 points of actually beating an incumbent, many demographers, social scientists, political scientists, pundits feel that Texas could be in play. We will find out if that's true or not in November. And I will continue to remind you that please, please, please vote, exercise your right. November 3rd or 2nd is right around the corner. Early voting is October 13th, but I digress. So, public policies. Conservatives, and remember that's an ideology, believe in low taxes, few financial resources committed to public services, and traditional social values in the family unit, church, etc. Those are considered conservative characteristics, and conservatism, again, is an ideology. Texas cultural regions. Let's start with those. A couple of the Texas cultural regions that we're going to review are East Texas, the Gulf Coast. Those are just a couple of the Texas cultural regions, and we're going to talk about their characteristics as well. You have a graph in your textbook that shows all of the regions, including the Panhandle, West, North, East, Central, Gulf Coast, South, Far West, and German Hill Country. So we're going to cover all of those regions and the characteristics and voting trends in those regions.